Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. It's the Monday, January 19, 2026 episode of The Marco Dre Show. Thank you for tuning in to hear today's groundbreaking news right here in America and across the board. The only show where the facts are facts and hard truths thrive. Let's begin the best hour of radio. Informative, uncensored, unapologetic, and ready to go. It's Monday, so you all know that I've got a lot of great articles for you today. A lot of relevant topics that no one else in the mainstream media is discussing, so let's start the week off right. I want to start off talking about Martin Luther King Jr. After all, today it is his birthday, and we celebrate the words that he spoke, and they hold great meaning still to this day, or at least they did at one time. Now, as time has gone on, we've learned several different aspects about his life that are not really pleasant to especially we conservatives. You know, he attended communist meetings, he plagiarized doctoral theses, he was possibly promiscuous and engaged in debauchery. His speeches were written by other people and not him, of course. And I'm willing to grant all that to you. And obviously I don't condone any of that behavior, by the way. But King wasn't a saint, but he was an orator. And he was a damn good orator. However, the words he was speaking, they meant something. And they still do. And they should mean something. They're about a nation coming together, not dividing itself. Not a two-tiered nation. Not a two-tiered justice system. Not laws for some and not for all. But e pluribus unum, out of many one. That's what we should be as a nation, correct? Equal protection under the law, the 14th Amendment. Now, today more than ever, do we need this to happen again in this country? It seems to be that way, though. I told you before, the 1960s counterculture revolution, in many respects, had a lot of bad issues with it, obviously. A lot of bad erupted from it. And this nation, the nation was very, very left-wing at the time. And, you know, the Vietnam War was taking place. You have the sexual revolution. You have women's rights. You have civil rights. You had all these different things. And while good came from some of these movements, some of the things that erupted from that topic and those issues still exist in this country today. Now, following the civil rights movement, there were policies that were put into place that were unjust, and we still see many of these aspects taking place in the country today. And I found this in one of Paul Craig Roberts' articles that he posted yesterday. What is left of America? And one of the topics he talks about in this piece, it's a great piece, by the way, and there's many different things he discusses, but it's very relevant to what came as a result of the civil rights movement. And while good came from the civil rights movement, we wanted everyone obviously to be treated equal, not treated on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. King's words could not be any more true, but is that the end result of this movement? And I'll say to you the answer is no. Paul Craig Roberts says, for 60 years in complete violation of the 14th Amendment that took place right after the Civil War, and of course the explicit language of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it has been the policy of the EEOC, that'd be the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that took place, a federal government agency, if you will, was actually to enforce discrimination against white males on the basis of course, their race and their sex. And after 60 years of prohibited race and gender discrimination, so-called, nothing's been done about it. Successive presidential administrations have accepted and, of course, perpetuated 6 decades of inequality under the law, so have the federal courts. So I ask you, the listener, listening to this right now, how could we have a civil rights movement that comes and said, okay, it's illegal to make any discrimination based on the race of somebody? Doesn't matter if you're white, black, Asian, mixed race, Native Indian, whatever the hell you might be. Doesn't matter. Under our Constitution, we are all equal under the protection of the law. How do we get to, well, that allows quotas in different administrations as far as college admissions, right? How does that happen? How do we do that? How do we say a business needs to now have X number of black people? Or it needs to have a certain number of Hispanic people. And again, I'm using the leftist terminology here, of course. Or we need a certain number of women, or a certain number of LGBTQXYZWTUV people now. And now it needs illegal aliens, right? Undocumented peoples, right? We need to protect undocumented peoples. That's what they're saying at these ICE raids taking place all across the country, particularly in Minneapolis. How do we get to this point now where we actively discriminate against certain groups of people? And by that, of course, I'm referring to white males. Now, I don't just say that as a white male, but what I'm telling you is that this does happen. Why is there any uproar about this? How come no one said anything about this? Why are there court cases? Because you obviously know, as sure as I'm sitting here, that if this was done to obviously any of these other minority groups in this country, you would never hear the end of it. 60 years later, we're hearing about racism in this country, right? We never hear the end of it. How whites need to do better. And now, of course, we have books, White Fragility, all these other ridiculous authors that write these awful, awful racist pieces. And I don't like using the word racist. I think it's a little bit baseless. But they focus on discriminating against white people. I'll just put it to you that way. And nothing gets said about it. Can you imagine if it was done in the reverse? What would be said about these people? You talk about cancel culture, they'd be done in 10 seconds. They wouldn't be happening. No, folks, this is the state of the country now. And, of course, Martin Luther King Jr.'s words were not accepted. I have to tell you that. They were not accepted. And they are not accepted. Even by the left, who pretend to, fawn all over him. Equal protection of the law exists to everybody. And you don't right a wrong by saying, what we're going to do now? We're going to discriminate against white men. After all, that's the only way black people can get ahead, which, again, is a bunch of nonsense in and of itself. If you look at the progress that black Americans made from 1940 to 1960, it was astronomical. A group has never grown the way black Americans did in that time period, before there was any civil rights, too, by the way. But what do we see come in the 1960s? Well, we see that we can openly discriminate against whites. We can openly discriminate in jobs, in college admissions. How come for 20 years we didn't need any of that, and yet blacks still, they grew as a people? They were very religious. There was no social welfare programs to exist at the time. That doesn't mean everything was perfect, but as a group, they were extremely, extremely resilient. They were growing. And now what do we see today? What do we see today? Well, again, with all this, the language, and of course the people that hijacked the civil rights movement. Think of the Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, certain other people that exist today, of course, that, again, use black Americans as a talking point. That's really what it comes down to. They get paid $20,000 to, have a speech about race and what have you. It's all ridiculousness. So that what was once a great thing, again, the words of Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream speech particularly, wonderful speech, by the way, it was hijacked. And it is hijacked to this day. So what I will say to you, and I'll leave you with this before I go on. We have to come together as a people, folks, of every race, of every creed. And the people that do not wish to be like this should get the hell out of the country. And no, you don't have a right to discriminate against people that you view as detrimental to your own success in life. We have people today that now talk about reparations. You have people that are like 50 years old. They were never slaves. They were never, any of these, had any of these awful segregation laws against them. They didn't exist in this time. They're the ones that want to come on and say, well, you owe us now. You owe us. Owe you. Nobody owes you a damn thing. Just so we're all clear on this. Nobody owes anyone anything. You want something, go take it. That's the way this country was created. And of course, we have wonderful charities that still exist in this country that always help people out and what have you. This whole idea that somebody owes you millions of dollars because 160 years ago, there were black slaves in America. Give me a break. So, I don't have much more to say about this topic other than we need to listen to, and of course heed, Martin Luther King Jr.'s actual words. That we come together, not that we separate. And I'll just leave it to you like that. Many people have been asking me, people have been saying to me, Jure, sometimes you're hard on Trump, you're hard on what various conservatives in the movement have said, and what have you. And I say to you, I found this from George Carlin, actually, this morning. He's absolutely right. I am a free thinker, first and foremost. Yes, I am a conservative. Yes, I voted for Donald Trump 3 times, but I am a free thinker. I analyze what people say. I look at the facts, of course. I don't look at what feels good to me and just start spewing that off. I go by what is reality. And that's why my show is unique versus other people's. I don't just carry water for the Republican Party. There are many other shows that do that. Have fun listening to those if you'd like, okay? I give you the facts. Because the truth shall set us free, right? That's what we've always been told. It's biblical. But I found this from George Carlin this morning, and it makes perfect sense. Okay? I go based on ideas. I go based on reality. I go based on facts and reasoning and logic on my show. I don't go by feel-good information. And I try to get you the most esoteric, hard-to-find research that I could possibly find for you that back my views. And, of course, back the reality behind them. But this is what George Carlin said when he was alive. Of course, that's over 20 years ago now. But he makes perfect sense of this, and I think it reflects me as a broadcaster, as a commentator, and as someone who believes in this country. Take a listen to this.
When your identity is your ideology, congratulations, you've officially screwed yourself, because now it's not just an idea, now it's you. And when the idea gets challenged, you don't hear disagreement, you hear an attack. So what do? You build a bubble. A nice, soft, padded little bubble where everyone agrees with you, uses the same words, hates the same people, and claps at the exact right moments. And you will defend that bubble at all costs, even if it makes you sound incredibly stupid. Facts don't matter anymore. Logic's gone. Humor? Dead. Because admitting you're wrong would mean admitting you are wrong, and that's unacceptable. So you double down. Louder, angrier, dumber. And that's how you end up defending nonsense like it's sacred scripture. Not because it's true, but because without it, you'd have to actually develop a personality.
Now, Sam Tripoli posted this. I don't know if it's AI or not, but everything that's said here is obviously the truth. I don't just put myself in a bubble and say I must defend Donald Trump with every fiber in my being. I look at the facts. I say, what's going on here? Where's the real information? What are the effects of what's going on here? Is there any truth behind it? And of course, I question narratives, and when Trump does very good things, I applaud him for it. Of course I would. When he sticks to the Constitution, I absolutely applaud him for that. That's our ruling governing document in this country, folks. Anything else would be asinine to follow. So that's why when Trump says things like, hey, I don't need international law, I'm not looking to hurt people, I say, well, absolutely we have to follow international law. 100%, of course we would. Who would say otherwise? If your own mind is your own guiding force and not the rule of law that we've all agreed upon, where does that leave us? It leaves you with just one's own discernment, what they think is right. And obviously we understand that we're a nation not only just ruled by a president, of course. We have a legislature, we have a judiciary, we have state governments, we have local governments, we have international law, of course, that we all have signed into, UN charters, and what have you. And of course, we always need to remember all this. So I just wanted to say that to you. Again, I don't know if George Carlin actually said that, but Sam Tripoli made it very, very convincing. But everything that was just said right here is very true. Stop living in a bubble. Stop living as, you identify as a conservative. Therefore, everything the right does is perfect. And whenever they're challenged, I must come to their beckoning. No. No, we follow the truth. We follow facts. We follow reality. We follow logic. We follow reasoning. And that's how we come to our basis. That's how we come to a conclusion. Anyone that's written a research paper knows that. And sometimes your thesis changes, as many of you know. I don't even know if they write research papers, though, anymore. Do they? I don't think so. That's another big problem in this country. We don't think. We don't write. We just go by what we hear first. And we cling on to that. And if anyone says anything about it, we get defensive. We need to get away from this. We need to have conversations. We need to think. Again, it goes back to Martin Luther King. One's character. What makes somebody's character? Well, to me, I would say a belief in God, of course, the Christian Bible. I would say the truth. I would say, really, it comes down to, respect thy neighbor. Work for a better community. Exchange ideas. Again, we can go to the Constitution, freedom of speech, right? The freedom to assemble. All these different virtues that we were given by our founding fathers, of course, which are greatly stemmed and rooted in Christianity. We need to get back to that. I keep telling you this. Is there a time where we need to have a counter-revolution to the counter-revolution we had in the 1960s? I think it's well overdue, folks, and it's time to right many of these wrongs. Just thought I'd bring that up to you. I saw this over the weekend, and it goes back to what I was just saying to you. It says here there was anti-ICE protest disruptions during a Sunday worship at a Minnesota church. Are we shocked? Of course not. Why would we be? So there was this anti-ICE protest, right? And for some reason they went into a church service to disrupt the whole church service, of course, right? And of course there's people there praying as the congregation sits or stands there. These protesters could be heard chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot," which again is ridiculousness. Renee Nicole Good did not have her hands up, okay? And that whole hands up, don't shoot nonsense with Michael Brown was, again, a bunch of nonsense. He never put his hands up like that. That was all baseless and, of course, manufactured by the lying media at the time. They also said other things like "ICE out" throughout the video. And for some reason, Don Lemon, who's a complete jackass, was there live streaming the entire thing. And the protesters were alleged, the church pastor, that they were claiming that this man was an ICE agent and working with DHS. Okay, and this was said by Don Lemon in his live stream that very few people listened to. So after this, violent week in the Twin Cities, of course, it was then put on notice that there was now 1,500 soldiers on standby to potentially report to Minneapolis because things were getting out of control. And I said to you last week, is Donald Trump going to incite the Insurrection Act? Is this what he's going to do? Seems like we're getting to that point, folks, aren't we? People can't even go and attend a church service without being disrupted. And I'm not going to play you the live feed from the dunce that went in there, was shouting at people, telling them they need to go and protest ICE if they believe in Christians, that they're fake Christians. Disrupting a church service, folks, is not a peaceful protest, just so we're all understanding this, okay? And for, again, Don Lemon to go out there and then question this pastor who's trying to hold his congregation together is ridiculousness. This is obviously a gross violation of the First Amendment, too, by the way. You have a right to peacefully attend a church service, of course you do, without being disrupted. And you have no right to disrupt it. People seem to misunderstand what the truth is. And just so we're all clear on this, the First Amendment does not give you the right to go and break up a proceeding like that, or an assembly. You have the right of the people to peacefully assemble. That is not a peaceful assembly when you go in and disrupt somebody's service. Now, if you want to stand across the street, hold signs and what have you, that's up to you. You have no right to go into a church service and disrupt it. And by the way, just so we're clear on all this, it's generally considered a violation of public order. So, for example, there could be legal consequences that come as a result of that. Now, there's no real federal law that says you can't interrupt a church service, but there's various state and local laws that, of course, can apply. disorderly conduct laws, trespassing laws. And in the past, courts have been sympathetic, of course, to obviously the attempts by churches to deny access to disruptive individuals. So you have no right to go into a church and start shouting obscenities, walking to the altar and challenging the priest, which obviously took place here. And it's very disgusting to see this. People are going there to, again, exercise their First Amendment. And I think this, again, I agree with the pastor here. This is a gross violation of the First Amendment. And to have Don Lemon, who's, again, an idiot, by the way, a schmuck of all schmucks, is Don Lemon. Through and through. This guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about half the time, which is probably why CNN fired his ass in the first place. During the church service, he actually goes up to the pastor and says the following. Take a listen to this.
What do you think of this?
I mean, this is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
But there were folks who will say,
I have to take care of my flock.
okay, but listen, we live in there's a constitution in the First Amendment to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
We're here to worship. We're here to worship Jesus because that's the hope of these cities. That's the hope of the world is Jesus Christ.
I want to be very respectful. Please don't push me, though.
We're here to worship Jesus.
Yes.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why we're here. Okay. That's what we're about.
Don't you think Jesus would be understanding
we're about
and love these folks?
We're about spreading the love of Jesus.
But did you try to talk to them as a Christian?
No one is willing to talk.
Okay,
I have to take care of my church.
Don Lemon is an idiot, is what's happening here. You hear the music, you hear the people, and you hear this idiot Don Lemon trying to say, well, there's a Constitution, there's a First Amendment, there's a freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble and protest. Yeah, there is. But that's not a peaceful protest when you disrupt somebody else's free speech and their right to assemble freely to worship Jesus. Now, later, I'm not even going to play the rest. He claims to be a Christian, Don Lemon. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. This is very shocking. This is going to happen more and more as time goes on. I said, unless this is stopped, these really they're riots in some respect, but this disruption to obviously civil society. Obviously, a church has nothing to do with what ICE is doing. And, of course, this allegation that this man is an ICE agent gives somebody the right to go and disrupt his church service and people freely worshiping Jesus is something else. Absolutely something else. So I'm eager to see what Tim Waltz-Around has to say about this. And, of course, Attorney General Keith Ellison, right? They should denounce this, obviously. And to, again, disrupt a church service, obviously is obviously ridiculous in and of itself. There's no need for this. There's no need for all this. These people should be ashamed of themselves. Absolutely 100%. But that's what's happening in America today, folks. It's right to go. It's fine for you to go and do a church service, disrupt it, to shout at the people that are sitting there, try to freely protest, worship. It's absolutely asinine to see this happening in this country. And I only say this to you because this is happening more and more and more. Again, you can go find the full piece. They streamed it, and they actively disrupt this church service. And shameful on them. Absolutely shameful on this. This is not freedom of speech. This has nothing to do with First Amendment rights. This has to do with disrupting all of that. Just so we're clear on this. So again, I'm eager to see what Jacob Fry, Keith Ellison, and Tim Waltz say about this. If they say anything about it at all. My guess is they'll probably champion it because it goes with their ideology, as we all know. All right, let's move on. This is in CNBC. It says China's annual trade surplus hits a record $1.2 trillion in 2025. Look at that. Even though exports to the United States decreased by 20%. I have to talk about the economy a little bit today. There's obviously lots going on with it. And we need to understand where we are. But look at this. It says China's exports growth in December sharply beats expectations, catapulting the annual trade surplus to a new record high, while imports rose at the fastest pace in 3 months. Wow. Exports surged 6.6% in the United States dollar terms. last month from a year earlier. Chinese customs data showed Wednesday, toppling analysts' median estimate for a 3% growth and accelerating from a 5.9% jump in November. Imports rose 5.7% in December from a year earlier, toppling expectations for 0.9% growth, the strongest since September of last year, when they climbed 7.4%. Wow. So we're looking at what China is doing, and what we're seeing here, folks, is the changing of global trade right now. That's what's happening right now. You're seeing one country with a massive surplus, and you're seeing another country that's getting massive deficits. That'd be us. It says here China's exports for the full year grew 5.5%, while imports stayed flat, taking Beijing's trade surplus to $1.19 trillion, up 20% from 2024. That is a nation that is growing. I'll just tell it to you how it is, folks. China's on the move. China is growing. But let's talk about the American economy in 2025. Let's break it down for everybody. We have President Trump's first year in office, and then we'll obviously compare it to what obviously we're talking about here with China and what they've been doing with their trade also in 2025. Let's understand something. Last year, the United States trade deficit, just for the first 9 months, was some $766 billion. That is a lot of money. Now, economists were estimating that the entire year likely reached anywhere between $820, $880 billion of trade deficits. But what's worse, what other people aren't telling you, is that the deficit of the United States in those first 9 months was 17% higher than in that same time period in 2024. Now, I thought the tariffs were allegedly, right, were supposed to be fantastic. This is supposed to boost the economy and other, we're not going to let countries like China rip us off anymore. That was what we were told. Right? That's how it was sold to us. So I guess the tariffs didn't work then, right? Because we still have this massive trade deficit. Now, while some listening will argue, well, hey, we're bringing in more money now, right? From those greedy Chinese companies, right? We're making them pay more, and we're showing them. And while I'll grant you that, yes, the Treasury is bringing in more money as a result of these tariffs, that the cost is now translated over to you in the stores, in the sense of consumer spending, right? So now we had inflation up 3% year over year in December 2025 from December 2024. We saw the CPI also going up almost 0.5%. Someone's got to pay the difference, folks, for these tariffs now. And that person is you. It's a hidden tax. That's what a tariff is. Anytime you hear the word tariff, I want you to think tax. That's what it is. A tariff is a tax. Now, it's also important to note that if these imports rebounded towards the end of the year, and they very well may have, again, during these trade wars we find ourselves in through 2025, it's actually possible that the deficit spending actually reached or exceeded $900 billion. So I want you to think about that for a second. China has a $1.2 trillion surplus. That's money they've earned from what they've exported, what they trade with other countries. And the United States almost has a $1 trillion deficit. That means we've lost $1 trillion. So that means we are importing more than we're exporting. That's not good. That's not a strong manufacturing base. I think we all can, again, agree on this. So let's understand something, though. Here's the big problem with these tariffs. We're told that we're being ripped off, right? No one is being ripped off. And that's why we have these massive trade deficits. It's a big lie fed to you by the propagandists, right? We need to do these tariffs so we stop getting ripped off from China, from the EU, from Brazil, from Argentina, whatever country you want to make up, from Canada, right? We got to put a 25% tariff because they streamed something about Ronald Reagan speaking negatively about tariffs. So Donald Trump rose the percentage of tariffs on Canadian products, right? Remember that happened? It's ridiculousness, absolutely ridiculousness. But the reason we have these tariffs is for one simple reason. We are importing more than we're exporting, folks. That's it. That's what it comes down to. It's basic economics. Remember way back in 2024? The U.S. imports from China was $438.7 billion of goods. That's what they sent to us. That's how much money they sent to us. Now, we, on the other hand, we exported to them, to China, some $143.2 billion worth of goods. Do a little simple math here, and we figure out that the trade deficit in that year was $295.5 billion. That's how much more China sold to us. That's why we have a trade deficit. That's what it comes down to. And again, that wasn't said by Marco Gervais. That was said by the U.S. trade representative at the time. So the reason we have these trade deficits and not these surplus like we once had is because we, the United States, we are dependent on foreign products and foreign goods that we want. We want these products, right? So we have to get them imported to the country because we're not making them. And of course, that the fact that our manufacturing is diminishing here in the country, China is leading the markets. And they're leading it in many different categories. They're leading it in electric vehicles, they're leading it in machinery, electronics, consumer goods, and yes, soon to be AI, artificial intelligence, the technology that will guide the future. That's all happening right in front of our eyes. Again, this is why in 2024 we had a $1.2 trillion trade deficit overall. That's why this happened. In the following year, we see China with a $1.2 trillion surplus. So some of you are going to argue, but it's going down, Gervais. Look, we saw it. It was 1.2 trillion in, 2024. Now it's maybe 900 billion. It's going down, right? Well, it's only dropped, though, because the amount of imports decreased because of these tariffs. And, of course, the tariff wars and the negotiations that took time to go back and forth. So you had less products coming into the country. So naturally, your trade deficit's going to be a lot less, right? You bring in less stuff, you have a smaller trade deficit, right? Less trade happening. And similarly, you export in the trade deficit that goes down. And of course, we know we had 20% less imports coming in from China into the country in 2025. So therefore, it's expected that that number is just going to drop, just again, because you're trading less. I've said this all along to you folks. I'll say it again because I want everyone to hear this. We have one of the world's largest trade deficits, and we need to bring back manufacturing in America. That's what it comes down to. Our manufacturing in 2025 made up only just about 10% of our overall GDP. And by the way, in 2025, it was up 2% from 2024. So we increased our manufacturing, just barely, though. Now, converse that to China's. About 25 to 26% of their overall GDP comes from manufacturing. You see the difference in the two nations. We're producing nothing but we're producing nothing but war. China's investing in business, in the future, in AI, and we're investing in, bombs, military spending, trying to acquire Greenland, for God's sakes. And now we're talking about, I saw this article pop up. It says President Trump says 8 European countries will face a 10% tariff for opposing the U.S. control of Greenland. What a bunch of nonsense this is. Folks, this is stupid. Really, when you think about it, this is dumb. This makes no sense to do these things. And while you might get a couple $1,000 check from these tariffs, you're paying a lot more for consumer goods. Last year, you're going to continue to do it this year. This is problematic, folks. We need to get a balanced trade negotiation happening between us and other countries. And again, if Congress wants to enact tariffs, they need to sit down and write the legislation that reflects Trump's wishes. That's fine to do that. But it has to come from Congress. It cannot come from Donald Trump on a whim. Oh, you don't like my policy that I want to take Greenland from a NATO country? Well, I'm going to put another, 10% tariff on you. This has got to stop. Businesses that require and, of course, need these products, because, again, we're not making them, Coming from the EU, coming from China, coming from South America, Latin America, wherever the hell they come from, doesn't matter. You can't do business that way. Because then the goods coming in have this 10% tax on them. So that means they cost 10% more to get to you. So that means you got to pay that. You, the business owner. So what do you think happens? For a little while, yes, they'll try to eat it up. I know small businesses that have done this, especially during the Biden administration when prices skyrocketed, roughly 25 to 30%. Small business owners I talked with them said, you know what, we're going to try to eat this up right now. We're going to do that. But as time goes on, your profits get smaller and smaller. And of course, obviously, maybe your rent goes up for your business. Obviously, the cost of the products to make your business run are increasing. That lower profit at a time of high inflation are problematic. So someone's got to pay that cost. And eventually it's going to come to you, the consumer. And in many cases, it already has. So we need to understand what's happening here. And while we're seeing China on the move, China growing, it's because they're investing in their businesses. They're investing in their economy. They're investing in China. Look at the growth from China from 2001 when they entered the World Trade Organization to right now. Massive infrastructure growing, massive businesses forming up. They're taking a lot of the technology that we gave them, and they can do this all on their own. They don't even need the United States anymore. And now BRICS makes up roughly 40%, right, of the world global economy, folks. The United States is roughly 23, around that percentage now. And it's only going to drop more if we start producing less and less. We have got to get the manufacturing under control in this country. I know I'm a broken record. I say this to you every week. But this has got to happen if we want to start building ourselves up. We've got to stop with the endless wars, stop with the invasions of Venezuela, controlling Venezuela, controlling Greenland, controlling Mexico, controlling Colombia, Cuba. We don't need this. We need business. We need opportunities in this country. And that brings me to my next article, too, by the way. This one's a good one. It's from a couple weeks ago. Still very relevant till today. You know, we got the upcoming elections happening right now. And, you know, in 2026, and we've got to get prepared for these. If we want to win, that's the big question. This is the Associated Press. Says Gen Z protesters lead global wave of generational discontent. Well, we saw this here in America, did we not? From the Andes to the Himalayas, a new wave of protests are now unfolding across the world, driven by generational discontent against governments and the anger amongst the young people. Let's stop and talk about this. Why would the young people be discontent with the future? Let's think about it. Because they have no future, in many regards. There are no jobs waiting for them. America's hollowed out. Again, thanks to Bill Clinton. Yep. Goes back to Bill Clinton. Goes 30 years ago. We got NAFTA. We got the outsourcing of jobs to China and overseas. Letting China enter the World Trade Organization in 2001, right after he left office. He's the one that brought them in. We see obviously the mergers, right? We got Glass-Steagall. We got all these bad things with Bill Clinton. In the 90s, we had a relatively good economy. We did. Largely because of the Ronald Reagan Revolution. But we abandoned those policies. And when people could go to college in the 80s and 90s, get right out of college and get a good paying job, that's much, much different in 2026. Especially for the Gen Zers. That'll be the people born in 96, 97 to, 2012, roughly speaking. So you got people from 14 years old to roughly 29, 30 years of age. Okay, all right. Anyways, these people see what's going on. They've bought into the let's go to college. They get out of college and they go, okay, it's time to shine. Time to get that job that I've been waiting for, they've been working for. And then they get there and they go, well, wait, there's nothing here for me. There's nothing going on. There's nothing happening at all. And it's not just indicative of the United States, it's indicative of the entire world. This is what's happening in many countries across the globe. And it's the Gen Zers that are pissed off about this. Because now you have this amazing debt now. You've gone to college. God knows where you went. God knows what it is today. I mean, it was expensive when I got out of college in 2010, 2011? Yep. I can only imagine what it is today. But again, thanks to Congress, they guaranteed all tuition across the country. That made college tuition spike their prices. And spike and spike and spike, and now today it's exorbitant. I've looked at some of these colleges, 6 figures just to go there for 1 year. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. Go there for 4 years, look what you're paying. For what? What opportunities are there for you? How are you ever going to pay that down? Might as well be a house mortgage payment, for God's sakes. It's ridiculousness in and of itself. But this week we saw in Madagascar, the president was forced out of power, out of the country, after the military mutiny took place, the culmination of weeks of demonstrations led by, you guessed it, the young protesters referring to themselves as the Gen Z Madagascar. And it's not just in Madagascar, Nepal, the Philippines, Indonesia, Kenya, Peru, Morocco. We're seeing it all across the world, folks. These protests have been sparked by specific grievances, again, driven by long-simmering issues like the widening inequality for their age group, economic uncertainty, government corruption, and nepotism of leaders alike. But the one thing they have in common, and this is interesting, mostly leaderless, mostly I say, they're mostly made up of young people who just brand themselves as Gen Z. That's what they know. That's what they are. Right? And they're upset with this. They buy into the American dream. They buy into the educational scam to go to college. You'll have a great job when you leave college. I heard the same thing. That's all they jam down our throats. Go to college, go to college, go to college. Okay, all right. I want a better opportunity. Absolutely. And then come to it, what's there for you? What's there for you? Very little opportunity. And by the way, I don't say this to come down on America. There are many opportunities in this country still. But it's not like it was when you went to college, let's say in the 1980s. If you'll recall, I read to you not too long ago, maybe a month ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. And it was a father lamenting the fact that his Gen Z child got out of college, similar degree to his. I think he had a degree in chemical engineering right off the bat, and I think he graduated in, maybe it was 85, 86. I can't remember the exact date. In the mid-'80s, during the Reagan administration. Right off the bat, hired. Good paying job. He's been there for almost 40 years. He's getting ready to retire, but now his kids hanging around the house. Kids also got a degree in engineering. Can't find anything. And later in the article, they had another engineer major in there. Applied to 900 jobs, heard back from 2. All across the country. They're willing to move. They're willing to go places. The opportunities either aren't there or they are bringing in other labor, which is another problem with the Trump administration. We're going to bring in 130,000 H-1B visa holders from India or China to take good paying jobs in engineering and AI. What's the purpose of going to school then? I'll refer you to the interview we had with Laura Ingraham. She said, we have the talent here to do this. He said, no, we don't. We got to bring in these people. No, we don't have to bring in these people. We have the best damn engineering schools in the country right here in the United States. Just so we're all clear on that. Of the top 10 in the world, 6 of them are in the United States. You're telling me we don't have the talent here? Give me a break. I don't buy it for a second. Not for a second. So as these social protests, these movements, they pick up, we're seeing this right here in the United States too, folks. Look no further than Zoran Mamdani in New York City. Why do you think he won? Because the young people went out to vote for him. And while I don't believe he's going to deliver on anything he's saying, they still went out and voted for him. Why do they vote for him? Because they aren't buying into the capitalist system now. Even though in 2024 they came out widely for Donald Trump. But what they saw was, hey, we're focusing on, bombing in the Middle East, bombing in the Ukraine. We have money for this, money for that. Why don't we invest in our own cities? Why don't we invest in any of this? Again, go look at any major city in America. Hollowed out, it's dirty, it's decrepit. dilapidated, no opportunities there. Businesses are boarded up. I mean, you can't even buy the real estate. It's so expensive. And right now, what you're seeing in America, you're seeing a very big housing bust. What do I mean by that? Or I guess I'll say real estate bust. That's more accurate. The Trends Journal talked about this specifically, and I've reiterated this to you many times in the past. You're going into cities now where roughly, 20%, 25%, 28% of the city real estate is empty. What's going to happen when these landlords can't pay the rent on these, the rates on these? What's going to happen to the banks that can't pay this back now? Well, they're all going to go bust, folks. Just so we're clear on this is what's going to happen. People can't afford the real estate, so these businesses, they leave, right? They either shut down, they go out of business, they go bankrupt, and now you have this huge amount of space that's just occupying space. That's it. There's nothing happening. They're not producing anything. So these, landlords, they're trying to rent it out, but no one's moving into these areas. So you have this big empty building they have to pay for. How much longer do you think they can pay for it? Now, if you have a lot of money, maybe you can hold that off for a while. But a lot of them this year in 2026 are going to go bust, and as a result, the banks are going to go bust too. Don't tell me I didn't warn you, okay? Just so we're all clear on this. So that's why Mom Dummy won. It's not because he has great ideas, but because he's actually offering them something they want. Cheaper rent, affordable bus fares, right? Affordability. He's tackling these issues they're all concerned about, the young people. And that's why they turned out en masse to vote for him. And again, I don't agree with any of his policies. I think they're all terrible. I don't think he's going to, obviously, equate to much in doing so. I don't think he'll achieve any of this. But the young people hear someone at least talking about their issues, their needs, what they want. They want affordable housing. They want to be able to buy a house, right? This is what they want. They want to be able to afford groceries. And, obviously, insurance pricing and rates. And they want, obviously, better transportation routes. Free busing. I can ride all around the city. Free. Fantastic. Now, obviously, because you listen to my show, that free doesn't necessarily mean free. Free means taxpayer funded. What's going to happen when all the rich people move out of New York City? Well, I simply don't. I know what's going to happen. It's going to come down to the middle class after that. There's going to be a lot of upset people about that too, folks. Again, just so we're all clear on this. They want, obviously, cheaper utility bills. They want all this. And no one's talking their language. And the average age now for a first-time home buyer is 40 years old. That's not going to go well with young people. 30 years ago, it was roughly 27, 28 years of age was the average home buyer. The average home buyer. Now today, the average home buyer is 40 years old. Who wants to wait until they're 40 years old to get started buying a house, starting a family that late? I mean, it's upsetting to people. It's absolutely upsetting to people. It's a major problem. And if we don't start addressing it now, you're going to see the Democrats run away in 2026. That's what it's going to come down to. It's going to be the Gen Zers that show up in support for these Democratic candidates. Because, again, they're the ones saying, well, I'll help you with affordability, even though they're really not, but at least they're addressing the issue. And that's why Mum Dummy won. That's why he won in New York City. That's why Katie Wilson won in Seattle. And that's why some of these Democrats are going to run away. That's why you saw it happening in places like Virginia. Speaking of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger just won. Well, she won, and obviously she was sworn in over the weekend. And it didn't take too long for the Virginia Democrats, after taking office, right, to immediately set their sights on the Second Amendment. Oh, you thought it was just affordability. You thought no one was going to question Abigail Spanberger, right? No. Well, the Virginia Democrats, who obviously were elected to office in 2025, have now been sworn in. And now the Second Amendment is right under fire. No, it didn't take long, right? Just what? She's been in office for 2 days now? Yep. It's all coming to a head. Now, Breitbart News noted that the Democrats had introduced a $500 tax on suppressor sales in the state and an assault weapons ban. What's an assault weapon? Nobody knows. But they just know the gun looks scary. That's why. So they're going to tell you what kind of gun you could buy. We're going to put these taxes on, obviously, buying firearms now. And it's going to, they want to put an 11% excise tax, right? That's a consumer tax to kind of dissuade you from buying the item. Usually these are on things like cigarettes and alcohol. Now they're putting them on the sale of firearms, ammunition, so to prevent you from obviously making maybe more sales. Who knows? But that's their intent, of course. They don't want you to purchase firearms. And of course, now the Virginia state legislature, both chambers, are now controlled by the Democrats. It's going to become a big mess inside Virginia, folks. So strap on. It's not going to be a fun ride. But look at this. It says HB 916 was introduced, explaining the curriculum requirements for Virginia concealed carry permits. And HB 901, which broadens the state's red flag gun laws. What are red flag gun laws? Well, they're illegal. Number one, they're unconstitutional, by the way. And, for example, that would make it so, let's say you had a family member, you had a dispute with them, and they call some anonymous hotline or whatever the hell they have to do, and they call and say, so-and-so has firearms, and they really scare me right now. They're very angry. I think you should go, check up on them. And what the state can do, they can get a judge to sign off on this. They can come in and say, oh, well, we've got to take the said guns from so-and-so, because they're a danger to society. And again, there's really no due process with this. They can petition it sometime later in court. That there's no guarantee they even get their firearms back. But this is what's happening. It's not even just happening in Virginia. It's happening in states like Florida, that's championed as a free state. Yet they have red flag gun laws. And this is why I tell you, don't go and tell everybody you own every firearm under the sun. Don't post pictures with your firearms. Don't tell people about this. They can come in and take them. That's just what it comes down to. It's an illegal confiscation of your firearms based on, I guess, a preventative detention sort of system. I don't even understand this. There's no crime that's been committed. But it's the illusion of a crime that can be committed. That's the problem. They also have HB 700, which has been put forth and will create a mandatory 5-day waiting period for all gun purchases. They do this in California, too. I think it's 10 days in California. They think, oh, the person buying a gun might be super angry. So they're going to come in super angry. They're going to file out all the FBI, paperwork. They're going to sign their name, understand the law, and then they're going to go commit a crime with it. Acidity in and of itself. But this is the new Virginia now. It's becoming more like California's gun laws. Then you got HB 871, creates storage requirements for firearms in the state, mandating that the firearm and ammunition for such firearms is locked in a container, compartment, or cabinet that isn't accessible to any minor or prohibited person present in the home. So now they have to come into your home. They have to tell you exactly where to put your firearms. See how this gets tyrannical? Yeah. Now, again, I think you obviously should store your weapons in a safe place, but I don't think the government needs to come in and start telling you what to do. Just my take on this. So you see how the Virginia Democrats, they're zeroing in on the Second Amendment in the same way that, Colorado Democrats did in 2013. And, of course, Californians have done in the past. Right? There is no Second Amendment. By the way, New York State is awful, too, by the way, with these gun laws. It's absolutely asinine. Well, look at this. Since 2013, Coloradans' exercise of the Second Amendment has been incrementally restricted year after year. Again, they keep voting Democrat, and they wonder why. Well, these restrictions include an excise tax on guns, ammo, sales alike, assault weapons ban, right? They can ban certain weapons from being sold in their state. Again, complete violation of the Second Amendment. A ban on magazine capacity. That means how many bullets can go inside the magazine that go into the firearm. Red flag gun laws, 3-day waiting period on gun sales, and now universal background checks, among other controls. Yep. Your Second Amendment going right away, folks. Right away. Nowhere in sight. All right, all right. I was going to talk about the Virginia Democrats advancing their new redistricting effort now in the state of Virginia. I don't have to say too much to this, but their legislature voted 62 to 33 in the lower chamber, which gave a constitutional amendment giving way for the state legislature the green light to temporarily redraw their congressional lines under certain conditions until 2030. So they're prepping up for the 2026 midterms, of course, as well. Everyone's vying for their own positions. But I do want to talk about this article in Bloomberg I have for you. So that UK's former Prime Minister Tony Blair has now distanced himself from Trump's $1 billion peace board fee. Well, I told you last week President Trump was finalizing his picks for this board of peace that's supposed to be taking place inside Gaza. I think it's funny because the ceasefire has, been away since November 30th of last year. There's been no ceasefire, folks. So how can we go forward with the phase 2? How can we even say there's a board of peace when there is no peace? It's just funny. But that, Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, who's been one of the appointees to this executive panel that President Trump is putting together, is now distancing himself from the president's demand of the countries that obviously have representatives pay $1 billion for permanent membership. I don't even know what this means. Why would somebody who's sitting on a board of peace need to pay $1 billion to sit on a board of peace? Now, Blair declined to endorse the request for the funds, which, again, has been part of the draft charter for the nascent organization. And in a further sign that details that the Board of Peace are provoking opposition from U.S. allies and partners over Trump's project. Now, here's what's going to happen here. And again, it's been alleged in the Hill, too. They have this said list. Again, nothing's finalized yet. Of the Board of Peace for Gaza. And by the way, many of these are the usual players in foreign affairs. You see, President Trump is going to be sitting on the chair of this board. Then you have Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State and as National Security Advisor. And of course, maybe even the possible Viceroy of Venezuela. We don't even know. But now he's going to have time to sit down on this Board of Peace, so-called, in the Middle East. Then, of course, you have Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, real estate brokers and investors with lots of money. And again, when they aren't talking to Putin about developing 200,000 acres in Ukraine, maybe they'll be sitting on this board for peace. Who knows? Then, of course, we got Tony Blair, as I just said to you, former UK Prime Minister. Right now, he's going to be distancing himself from this position. What's interesting about Blair, I think, he's got two sons that work in AI. They're the founders of two separate AI companies, and one of them actually works with British military intelligence. I thought that was interesting. So it's interesting if Blair comes in, and they're trying to obviously rebuild Gaza, right? They've got to do that. And they want it to be a modern-day police state, right? Think of your own smart city, right? These ideas that, the powers that be want. They've got the right guy to come in to start investing, and putting money into this and putting this technology in place. And they'll make a lot of money off this. That would be wonderful for them, wouldn't it? So it makes sense who they're putting in. They also have Ajay Banga. He is the president of the World Bank. I'm guessing he'll either be loaning out some money to some of these real estate developers on the panel. I don't know. But he's also been tasked, by the way, with transforming banking into something faster and more effective. Well, what could that be? Well, maybe Gazans, maybe he can create a new digital currency for them, right? Since the banks were left in ruins inside Gaza and people have no currency. Maybe that will be the role he plays. I don't know. And finally, you've got Mark Rowan. He's another American billionaire and investor and the CEO of Apollo Global Management, one of the top investment firms in the country. So maybe he'll be the guy who dishes out all the money, right, along with some of these other investors per se. Works in private equity, credit, and insurance. So they're going to need all that inside Gaza, right, during this rebuilding they have planned. And again, Rowan, like the others, he's a strong pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist supporter. And of course, as the Times of Israel has reported, that his activism's only intensified since October 7th. He wants Jewish leaders like himself, right, to hold people responsible for the consequences at these college institutions. So in other words, no free speech on college campuses because these protests have been largely driven by not only anti-Semitism, but anti-Americanism. He's also a major donor to the protests that took place, the donor protest at the University of Pennsylvania. So again, all these people on this board are all pro-Israel, right? But the only two that are actually pro-two-state solution that I've mentioned are Tony Blair and possibly Donald Trump, which I don't ever believe this will happen. I don't think Israel will allow it to happen. But there you go. There you go. This is this new board of peace, and it's shaping up to be a who's who. But why is there nobody from the Muslim side of this situation? How come no one from any of the Gulf Arab states are on this board that can actually speak on behalf of the Palestinians? And by the way, we talked about the estimate of, obviously, people killed. I've been saying this to you for some time now. We still see shootings. We still see airstrikes inside Gaza. They've continued on past this imaginary line in the sand, roughly. But the estimate out today in this region for people dead inside Gaza, 442 to date. Now, in the time frame from when I said the ceasefire ended from November 30th to December 11th, it was said to be anywhere between 256 and 300 people killed as an estimate. Again, we don't have the final numbers. So, we have the board of peace, but where is the accountability? If the people sitting down are not coming to say to Israel, what are you doing? You killed almost 500 people in a time where we're supposed to be in a ceasefire. Again, this is a board of peace full of Zionists. And again, no one speaking on behalf of the Palestinians. So why no affiliates on the board for this board of peace from any of the Arab world? Or the Muslim world? No one from Egypt? No one from Jordan, Morocco, the UAE, Saudi Arabia? How about Turkey? How about Qatar? How about Pakistan? How about Indonesia? That helped back this whole plan, by the way, that told the Palestinians, we'll do this, we'll work with you, to address actual real peace in a realistic and prudent way. This is why I don't see Hamas disarming anytime soon. And if Hamas doesn't see how, phase 2 can happen, why would they disarm? If there's no one on this board that will speak on their behalf, why would they think that they're going to help them in any way? When Israel, blatantly in front of our eyes, and anyone that wants to look and see it, is doing this, who speaks for them? This is the problem. Why shouldn't they have a representative from each and every one of the countries I just said to you also sit on this board of peace that can work with the Palestinians, that can work and negotiate with Hamas for them, and can actually hold the other side accountable? And by the other side, I mean Israel. Right away, they've been denying humanitarian aid into this region. Right away. They refuse to release one of the, there's still many political prisoners inside Israel right now. But they wouldn't release Marwan Barghouti. He's the number one person, and he's been one of these Palestinian leaders for quite some time. He's been so-called one of these beacons of hope for the Palestinian people, and probably a future leader of the area, should there be a Palestinian state. Netanyahu refused to release him. So why is it okay for Netanyahu to release people that they said they wanted? He was the number one pick that Hamas said they wanted released. But yet, there's going to be strong consequences if they don't release a deceased body, probably in the rubble inside Gaza right now. 80% of the whole territory has been bombed. There's going to be strong actions for them. This is the part that makes no sense to me. Where is the accountability? Where is it? There is no accountability. And there's nobody overseeing the peace plan. And there's no strategy, folks. This is what's been indicative of all these peace plans. Even for example, these military aspects. We went into Venezuela. Where's the strategy to control the oil now? Or stop this overflow of so-called drugs that come out of Venezuela? Seems like the drugs have been pushed away, and now it's only talking about oil. We need strategies. And by the way, what's the strategy inside Iran? You have by the Iranian state television, I saw this in the Washington Examiner this morning. Iranian state TV was hacked, and they aired a message from the exiled Crown Prince Pahlavi urging the protests to continue inside Iran. Well, you talk about a last-ditch effort to keep this going. I told you before, you got to expect something to happen there too, folks. It's just simply going to happen in time. But no one is overseeing the peace in this region. That's what this comes down to. There's no one looking over the peace. How come? There should have been people that day looking for peace inside the Gaza Strip. And the West Bank, too, by the way. That's another disaster in and of itself. Folks, thank you so much for being here with me today. I appreciate you so much. Another show in the books. As always, hope you learned something from it, and we'll share with others. Lots of good information in that show. Make sure you store up your food, your water, ammo, gold, tools, anything to be self-sufficient. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for more groundbreaking news on the next Marco Dre Show. Until then, be good, stay busy, and God bless.